All right, guys, it's back to another talk here about potentially splitting up the college football world for a future project. So I'll go ahead and let's go straight back here to what we were looking at last time. The issue, as I've told you before, we'll put this back here. Thank you, Firefox. Issue that we have is that you have this big gap up here. Now, there are different things that you can do, of course, to try to handle that gap. As I said last time, and people have noted this in the comments, you could go back to the four Pacific four Northwestern schools, along with these four California schools, Cal, Stanford, UCLA, USC, and bring back the old Pac-8 and just have that be a conference unto itself. Although I will say that if you're going to do that sort of like East-West divide, you run into a big problem here where you have a really, really weak division in which Utah or potentially even Colorado, depending upon how you put it together, in which a team there would end up getting almost an automatic division title and push into whatever playoff structure you create. So, I mean, while it is possible to do that, I'm a little bit hesitant to do it. The idea that I do like a little bit better is to look into putting a team like, I don't know, South Dakota State into some sort of large division up here. And start including some FCS programs. Now, South Dakota State is a team that I would like to mention in particular because this is the sort of team that I think, at least in theory, could probably fit into this structure and do so really well. Where by the time I'm filming this right now, we have not seen the end of the season yet. They haven't played against Montana, and there's another team we can include, Montana. How are Montana this year? Montana went 13-1 in 2023. So this is another team that potentially you could also add. I mean, I know that this isn't like a great they're not playing against like, great and amazing programs or anything like that, but it might be interesting to put some of these teams in to give ourselves a little bit more space up here. And I mean, the question is, do you want to see a Montana team that played really, really well, or do you want to include like Colorado State, right? For me, I would rather put in like Montana, South Dakota State, and some of these other schools that I don't know quite as much about than having to put in a bunch of dregs that are going to lose every game anyway, and so it doesn't really matter, right? That's just my opinion. I'm interested to know what you guys have to think about that. An interesting thing I noticed as I was doing my intensive research here, which hasn't been that intensive, is that the last time South Dakota State lost a football game was in 2022 when they lost at Iowa 7-3. You talk about your classic Iowa football score. That's it right there. They're playing an FCS team. Now, granted, a good FCS team, and Iowa was only able to win 7-3. That must have been one for the ages, man. Holy cow. So, I mean, that's the other thing that's kind of going on through my head, right? I don't know what everybody thinks about this. I know that the default is that, it's an FCS team. They're not going to be as good. They're going to have the floor completely wiped with them. But, I mean, if you went 14-1 one season and your one loss was to Iowa playing ugly ball, and then the next season you go 14-0, maybe 15-0, I mean, we'll find out later. Right, that's a pretty good argument that, hey, maybe we could include this team in a larger structure. Now, the other thing that we would have to look at, of course, is where do you put them, right? You could put them up here, again, with Iowa State, Iowa, Minnesota, something like that up here. You can even throw in Colorado, Nebraska just for fun in a division. And this would allow you to have Washington State, Oregon State, here, as well as perhaps like Montana and maybe a couple other FCS programs. I have to do a little bit more research and sort of figure out how you could set this up geographically. But that's kind of the point here, which is that if you allow yourself to use different FCS schools, all of a sudden you like open yourself up, you open up possibilities. So, there's stuff that can happen with this map that couldn't happen otherwise, and you can sort of fill in some of these gaps, right? Again, we wouldn't be really circumspect about this. We don't want to stick in a whole bunch of schools that like are awful, right? Now, somebody else told me, and I should probably look this up. Somebody told me that the Ivy League football in 2023 ended in a bit of a controversy. Yeah, Harvard, Yale, and Dartmouth all finished at 5-2. So technically, if we were going to do this with like a Northeast type division, instead of having a bunch of UMass and UConn, which I wouldn't want to see, we could put in some Ivy League schools. You can put in there's Harvard, there's Yale, and Dartmouth is. You guys are gonna roast me in the comments for not knowing this off the top of my head. Dartmouth is around there as well. I cannot see them from here. Here you are, way up here. So you could do that as well and sort of, round this out a little bit more. One of the reasons why I'm interested in doing this is because we want to do a program like this that doesn't just count for teams in 2023. We want to have sort of a general structure that we can use to go backwards in college football history. So in Action PC Football, you can there are user-made seasons for years like 1946, for example. So if we go look at 1946 in college football, we know that, Notre Dame won. Their one big match of the season was against Army, in which it ended a 0-0 draw. But there's a lot of other interesting things going on here as well, including teams that didn't play against everybody else, such as your Ivy League schools, right? So you could look and see, well, Yale was 12th, Penn was 13th, Harvard finished sort of in between them with the overall standings. How would they do if they had to face teams that were not just Ivy League schools? Like, would something different happen? I don't know anything about Hardin-Simmons, right? Perhaps somebody can enlighten me there, right? Were Delaware really that good at 10-0? Did they really play anybody, right? Should Georgia have had a shot at the national championship? That's what I think probably should have happened in 1946, since they were unbeaten and untied, right? So there are questions like that. We can't necessarily go back and redo things the way that they happened like originally, but we could look at this and come up with a structure that's a little bit more equitable and force teams to have to actually play and win to claim the title. One of the problems I have with Notre Dame, and I love Notre Dame, one of the problems I have with Notre Dame, though, in 1946 is that they played a bunch of really poor teams. Yes, I know they did play USC, they did play Iowa, and they had their big game against Army, which they didn't win, right? But the other teams that Notre Dame played in 1946 were not exactly like the greatest teams of all time, which means that you do have a question as to why this 8-0-1 team ended up finishing above Georgia, who also played and beat a number of ranked teams and did so really in what I would consider to be a really convincing fashion. So, there you have it. I know it's not really much of like a polemic argument one way or another, but this is the reason why the more I think about this, the more I think it would probably be more interesting if we open this up just a little bit. Now, it depends upon, how soon does the season disc come out? I think it comes out in August of every year, and how many teams are actually included. I may have to rely a lot on the Action PC Football community to get something that will, be playable and that's like at least somewhat homegrown and stuff like that, homebrewed and all that. But I do think it's at least an interesting thing to look at, an interesting thing to try. And if we set this up the right way, it can be really versatile. So, for a certain season, we can dump out the teams that played poorly, put in other teams that were good, and have some sort of interesting structure, interesting season to play through, hopefully with some interesting storylines. Anyway, I've rambled long enough. Talk to you later. Bye.